Welcome and keyless ally specters to a very special episode of the Mass Effect Lorecast. I'm assuming direct control of this podcast today because Tom is at a wedding. So before you all feel bad and sad for him that he has to miss this, he's having a time of his life. So he's having a great time. But I have a special guest joining me today. You've surely seen his work throughout the Mass Effect games. Zachariah Scott joins us on the show. Zach, thank you. Can I call you Zach?
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about what kind of work you did on the Mass Effect series.
So howdy. I'm Zachariah Scott. I got my own sign-on. I can't break it after I used to do tutorials. And my journey with BioWare is a fun one, and I really would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a bit, because honestly, there's a lot that goes on in this industry, but I think that the work that went on this project was specifically unique. It was wild. Here's how I got started with BioWare. I applied to college, and I applied to BioWare right out of high school, and I got rejected from one of them.
Wow. Did they give you a reason for that rejection?
Nope, just bad. I was a bad student or something. But I was good at Machinima, and Machinima got me noticed by BioWare. And when BioWare was spinning up production on Mass Effect 2, when they made Mass Effect 1, they had a lot of cinematics, more than an average game, and they needed to figure out how to make those at scale. Because you think of a game, that's an hour, 2 hours of cinematics. You think of Mass Effect 1, and that's 60 hours, of which each player only sees 30, of which you got a million choices going on. It broke people's brains. So they turned to Machinima, and they brought in a bunch of Machinima artists of that era, the 2006, 2005 era of Machinima people. You get Paul Marino, who was big in the Half-Life face puzzle community. You get Ken Thane. You get Armando Troisi, who will tell you that he invented Machinima but has never made one. Amazing dude. And eventually you get to me, and I was noodling around Gary's Mod and Unreal Tournament, and that got me noticed by BioWare, and so I applied. And I walked right in the door, and they said, here's a bunch of stuff. And from there, I just learned as I went.
So you essentially went from making memes to then working for a legit project. What did that feel like?
Honestly, it felt it was a mind-blowing experience to go from a hobbyist who had always been literally breaking games apart, right? Modding, right? Doing Machinima. You're messing with stuff that the developers never expected people to mess with. And that was my jam. But I never had a sense of community. And I remember very specifically coming into BioWare and being oh, wow. I took a deep breath, really powerful. I found my people. And I've learned over time that wasn't just because I walked into a game studio and a game studio was going to do that. I've learned that was because that Mass Effect at that time is something special. And so it was wild. It was wild for a million reasons that you could never recreate.
Yeah, I was going to say, I spoke with one of your colleagues. We heard from him on the show. I want to say it was almost a year ago at this point, John Ebinger. And he had told us that he had gotten into it in a similar way. And it turns out that I actually met another one of your colleagues, Ken, when I went to PAX West here.
Oh, yeah, Ken's great. Oh.
Ken had told me that they had essentially scalped the entire Machinima industry for his team.
This is what we did. That is if you go back to Gary's Mod Machinima and some of the WoW stuff that John was doing, it was really vibrant. And then in 2009, it stopped coming. And then it came back when Source Filmmaker came. But it was wild. And that was something that we, whenever we needed to bring people on, right? That's who I went to. Everybody on the team, 9 out of 12 of them were Machinima people. It was wild. We would Paul Marino, one of the really old school dudes, he wrote a book, Machinima for Dummies. You know what it looks like. It's yellow, right? And Armando Troisi, our cinematic design director, would bring the book out and very cheekily say, all right, it is time to read from the Book of Paul, chapter 4, verse 6. Open up Blender and scrub the time head to 30 seconds. Spawn a cube. create an animation, and it was just like,
Amen.
yeah, exactly. And we lived that life, and it was a real proud thing that we embodied, because when we had to do the game, the content there was so much content, right? And we understood that, like, you had to beg, borrow, and steal and make it out of whatever you could. And so I guess that's kind of why I really was excited to talk about Mass Effect with you, is because what I hope we'll get into is that process led to some incredibly inventive, creative, and funny solves. And I would love to, like, highlight some of the stuff that's happening just out of sight, off screen of the camera when you're playing that game, because there's some wild ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of these scenes they have such staying power for such good reason in the video game industry that I think that passion really translated well. And so, yeah, I think that these scenes have such amazing staying power through the entire, it's been like 17 years since Mass Effect 1. It's been 15 years since Mass Effect 2, and yet we're still talking about them. And so I wanted to really drill in on some of these scenes and ask you to describe what was the environment working on Mass Effect like back then, specifically for your cinematic design team. We know that the voice actors rarely got the chance to work in the same physical place for these scenes, but I don't think that was the case for your team on Mass Effect. So what was the camaraderie like?
Okay. How do I set the scene? All right. So imagine you're in the middle of Canada and it's negative 60 degrees outside. And the sun rises at 10 a.m. So you're already at work, and the sun sets at 4 p.m. So you don't go home till it's dark. And so you're in this small room working on this game, and there's so much game to make that we are just terrified at all corners, right? And that led to us just, like, putting every ounce of, like, blood, sweat, and tears into that game, and still not even being confident that it was going to be good at the end of the day. But that didn't stop us. So we just, like, we only had each other to rely on. And honestly, like, that is a very true statement, I believe. And that extends everybody on the cinematic design team and everybody on the regular design team. We had some amazing people. The sound team was amazing. But all of us had like 60 hours of game to make in 2 years, a little bit less. And it was just like go from jump. And so we very quickly got good at being able to, like, talk to somebody and say, oh, this scene is crap. It needs to be better. You got to fix this. You got to change this. But also, let me take you to the beer and, like, listen to you cry and be a shoulder for you to lean on, like, all night long. Right. Like, it was very.
Yeah, I can imagine with that looming deadline, right? That looming deadline and a pile of work in front of you, and the sheer amount of stress that must come from that you have to become closer with your teammates.
Yeah, when people came onto the project, I was one of the earlier guys. So on Mass 2, at the start, it was 4 of us on cinematic design, and that was me, Leo and Rob, Leo, Lucy, and Bay, and Robert Stoneman, all 3 Machinima guys, all 3 wild personalities, but it was just us. And every time we brought a person on, it was like, all right, Zach's going to teach you Unreal, and Zach's going to show you the tools, and we're gonna hold your hand and look over your shoulder. And so there was a real sense of, like, those are my guys. I was responsible for them. And, even where we're not even friends anymore, I'm still happy for what I gave them and what we all did together.
Yeah, I can imagine the shared sense of purpose. That would be really, really something really special. Now, speaking of that purpose, one of the things that you were talking to me off air about was that you had a hand in programming interrupts. The interrupts that we've all seen with the flashing Paragon or Renegade things on the bottom of the screen. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Oh, not only was I involved in interrupts, that was a continuous thing for my entire time on the project, and it was also the very first thing I ever started on. I think we'll get to it a bit later, but the interrupts, we didn't know how to make them, right? We had never done them. The whole process of Mass Effect is that you stop, make a choice, time is kind of frozen. And this idea that time wasn't frozen alone broke people's brain. And then it's, oh, and we can't have Shepard say, I'm going to punch you, punch button coming up in 3, 2, 1. So we had to figure out processes and techniques to telegraph and foreshadow what's going to come up so that like you figure out the right combination of actions so that when that button pops up, the player roughly understands, oh, Shepard is mad at this guy. This guy's going to be a jerk. Shepard's going to punch this guy. And that was a whole process. That took us many times, many tries at that. And the really funny thing is the very first interrupt in the game that we ever did, we did it the first time and it was done. And we didn't change it.
Wow, you did it. You just said, let's do it live, and you did it in one take.
Yes, it was literally, yeah, it was honestly maybe the only scene I ever worked on that didn't change.
Incredible. And, we actually have a clip of that exact interrupt here. And for our listeners who are listening just on the audio form of this is a reason why you should go and subscribe to us on YouTube, because I'm about to show this clip. It's magnificent. It's one of our favorite clips on the show and one of the community's favorite clips by far. This happens during the Thane recruitment mission, and let me just go ahead and play this right now, and we'll go ahead and watch.
Around, very slow.
Damn it.
Tell me where the assassin is, and I might let you live.
If I knew that, I wouldn't be wasting my time talking to you. You're not one of Nasana's mercs. Who are you?
You've got 2 ways down. Express or coach. Your choice.
Look, pal. Even if I knew where he was, I wouldn't tell you.
Not the answer I was looking for.
I've got nothing more to say to you. If you shoot me, my team...
How about goodbye?
What an amazing line. How about goodbye? Okay, so you have to walk me through how this was imagined. Was this written first? Was this an idea from you or the cinematic team, how this would go?
So this was, this mission was the first mission that we brought to E3 for Mass 2. This was a big showcase. It had all of our cool stuff. It had Thane, it had intrigue, action, cool lighting. This was already written. God, I'm spacing on the writer who was in charge of it, but like I know that line, "How about goodbye?" that was there from day one. And the window, coming through the window, we knew exactly what we were trying to get on that one. And then the fun came in some of the like versions you guys didn't see, where he hits a car on the way down, or like Shepard kind of crosses his arms and is smug. There were at times like 20 versions of that, and this scene is where I originally learned basic cinematography. So it's a fun thing how far you can get on instinct before you actually hit like craft. And when I was on this scene, I was learning as I went. So I must have shot this scene like 30 or 40 times around it. It's a trip watching it because every line is burned into my brain.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure you can recite it from memory, as can a lot of fans, which is funny because, so I stream Mass Effect, right, on the weekends. And every single time I get to this point in a playthrough, everyone who's watching demands I smash that Renegade interrupt.
It's the good one. It's great. It's so good. All the Renegade ones.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of flavor behind those Renegade interrupts, right? And we could go all day talking about some of the Renegade interrupts, but I do want to shift our attention to one specific Renegade interrupt in Mass Effect 2 and 3, which I feel like it has aged a little poorly. Now, can we talk about the interrupt where you're talking with Khalisah bin Sinan al-Jalani, the antagonistic reporter on the Citadel? And I wanted to talk about, because when I played through this, right, back in 2009 in Mass Effect 2, it was a funny thing because it was so outlandish. And now the political landscape has changed around us. But I wanted to get your perspective on like what it was like programming that reporter punch back then and how you view it now.
So yeah, this is a wild one too. So I believe that this was Vanessa Alvarado who did this particular scene, which is awesome. She was on this one, and she made damn sure she was on it for the next game because even she loved punching the reporter. And it's kind of funny that all of us at the time really didn't think too hard, or at least we weren't talking about like, oh, wait, we're punching a reporter who's trying to report on like the human representative of all of space, like in like putting up for us in front of like all of these races, all of these council members. Like, actually, if it were me and I was in this universe, maybe I would be on the side of the reporter. But also, it's another good interrupt, right? Punch interrupts were always fantastic, and this was like there's a political level where this is kind of problematic, and there's a much more base level where it's like, oh, you're just putting a person in front of me who's going to say a bunch of stuff that's just going to annoy me, and then you're going to give me the option to smack him in the jaw. And I kind of like wish that we had the awareness to be like, oh, that's a really powerful moment, because like harnessing that for good every time we do it for good. It's like we should have made that guy that we push out the window way sassier, right? It's like there's something sweet about building up the payoff, right? And I think that's why, like, even at a fundamental level, everybody loves punching the reporter.
Yeah, and like I said, you know, I did it back in 2009, and it was a funny thing because it was so out of the ordinary. It was so extreme, you know, and now the political landscape has changed around us where we're actually seeing attacks like on journalists in the United States, in the West, and the attacks are on the rise. So the way that the kind of zeitgeist around that one action has changed. But yeah, I can see how dramatic it was back in the day, and especially, you know, like just looking back at like YouTube poops, right, and gamer poops, how that fits in so well to that era too.
Oh yeah, and I think it's also, there's a part of it that's a credit to our writers for writing actually sophisticated stuff, right? Maybe we got a weird take on it, and that's entirely subjective. I don't believe that my opinions reflect the opinions of other devs. But it's an interesting scene. I've worked in a lot of games that have had scenes that I just forgot about, and this one, you know, it's a great one.
It's definitely not boring. It's definitely not boring, and certainly one of the more memorable ones. But speaking of scenes, I wanted to ask, which scenes have you seen that players or fans really love? And you say, hey, I did that.
Ooh. I mean, I think the thing that I did the best job of that people like the most is got to be the end game of Mass Effect 2, where I was pretty deeply involved with everything going through the Omega Relay, the big speech at the table in the Normandy. I mean, that was, maybe I'm just more proud of that than it's popular, but like that was hard. That was really hard. And we managed to pull it off, and like it was, I mean, honestly, if you want to talk about being surprised by people liking our work, that's the end cap to that game. And I remember the night that game came out, like, we were so beaten by working on it that I was like, this is going to be a 60 Metacritic. We have failed, right? And I was so close to it. And then like seeing people be like, oh, this whole like 3 hours at the end of the game is like the best part. I was, you know, brought to tears, right?
Oh, well, yeah, and it's still viewed like that. You know, I'm active in a lot of Mass Effect forums. I'm active on Mass Effect Twitter, which for better or for worse sometimes. But by and large, most people, I think, they view the ending of Mass Effect 2 as the single best ending to any Mass Effect game.
Well, it's definitely, I hesitate to say if it was harder than the Mass 3 ending, but what I will say is when I finished the Mass 2 ending, I made damn sure I didn't work on the Mass 3 ending.
I can only imagine the pressure, right? Because there's so much gravitas leading to that moment. And just thinking about it narratively, like how many different arcing branches there can be because of all of your different decisions and who lives and who dies, and how much work that must mean for the cinematic design team to have to program. Oh,
but also you're on a timetable, and every single eye in the company is looking at you, especially the highest paid eyeballs. And if anything goes wrong, it's horrible. And also, we were like breaking the game getting that thing made.
How so?
I think, I mean, you fight a big giant skeleton reaper, and that's not a thing in the game. So, like, when I say that's not a thing, I mean, like, the Praetorian, that's an enemy that, like, has AI and stats. There was a Boundary Break or something video I saw. I'm not exactly sure who it was, but it was, like, a couple months ago, where they were flying around the endgame collector base. And they flew way outside the map, and they saw 2 collector drones just floating in space. And they said, this is interesting. I wonder what these are. And I'm like, the one on the right is storing the health for the Reaper baby, and the one on the left is storing the shields. And every time you shoot the Reaper baby, those guys take damage, and when one of them dies, then that part of it dies.
That's hilarious.
And it's like, yes, that's hilarious. And it's also like, we built it 2 months before the end of the game. That's
the most duct tape thing I've heard about the Mass Effect 2 ending.
No. Okay, here's the real me. I think we got to like 4 months before we shipped the game, and we said, "Oh, we forgot to put a bad guy in the game," and so we made Collector General, and we made him do the assuming control thing, so that you would hear his voice constantly as a specific character, even though he was coming through many voices. And like all of that came together right at the end of the game. And we were like, oh, we need to fix this. And we found like the perfect fix, and it changed everything.
Oh yeah. And then at the very end of the game, you hear Harbinger basically say, "You failed me for the last time."
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Total.
Yeah. Because we had to be like, oh, and this guy has to be a Reaper, but we don't have a Reaper, so he's possessed by a Reaper. And honestly, it was a stroke of genius writing. I get it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I personally would not have known that the Collector General was a last minute throw in until you just said that.
Yeah, I hope I don't get in trouble for sharing that one.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's interesting. And like I said, I mean, I would not have known. I don't think any of the Mass Effect fans would have known that because it was so masterfully done. Now, I wanted to talk about another scene that I know you worked on. And this scene, I mean, we don't talk about masterclass in like cinematics and animation for video games in 2009. Thane's recruitment mission. Holy cow. This one had some unique cinematic qualities and animations to it, right? Because I remember when this first came out, I had never seen anything like it before. So I have the clip up here. Let's watch it, and I want to get your opinion afterward.
Before you kill me, just tell me who hired you.
I'm not an assassin, Nasana, but I am looking for one.
You break in here and decimate my security just to find the person who's here to kill me? What are you playing at, Shepard? What?
I heard something.
Damn it. Check the other entrances. You stay put. When I'm finished dealing with this nuisance, you and I are going to... Who?
Impressive. You certainly know how to make an entrance.
That was, I mean, there were a lot of unique, it felt like just watching it. I've never seen, for example, anyone else up to that point in the Mass Effect universe snap an enemy's neck, let alone drop down from the vents, snap someone's neck, shoot another, and then stick the gun in the gut of Nasana Dantius. How did you pull that off?
So, unfortunately, small correction. This scene was animated by Parrish Lay, our senior cinematic animator. This was a very rare case where a cinematic animator worked on a cinematic design scene for that portion. And then once you get into choices, that is work by Armando Troisi. I do believe I did a little bit of the lighting on this. And I was all over this scene for like bug. I just want to give credit to those guys, but I can talk about it.
Well, yeah,
I've stared at this scene a billion times.
And Parrish is still on the project, right? At least that's as far as I knew.
I think so. I haven't checked in, but yeah, Parrish Lay. Again, if people are not aware, I think you've already heard it. Mass Effect, all the games had two cinematics teams. You would have the cinematic animation team, which heavily did the space stuff, and then some of the extreme choreography stuff, which this is an example of, which is amazing.
I was going to say, so since you didn't have your hand directly in that, maybe you can help explain to our listener base, who most of us have no experience at all with game development, right? Explain to us just how intricate and complex developing a scene like that would be, because like I said, I didn't think most of those animations from Thane right there were reused.
Well, we did eventually reuse some of them, but it is the case. So to kind of break down the format, you have two cinematic teams. This is because you can either hire people who are really good at super high-end filmic stuff, or people who can do like a million things that are dynamic. Like it's designers versus animators. And in this case, we're talking about handoffs between departments. So this scene, Parrish took the opening 20, 30 seconds. And then as soon as you start to get into choices, that's where Armando steps in. And you'll notice, if you really pay attention, slight differences in filming styles as well. If you really pay attention, you can tell kind of who's doing the scene by each one. Side note, I'm not responsible for all of those Miranda butt shots. There is one guy, and we constantly roast him behind the scenes, but I won't put a name on him. But like, it's a funny thing, because you would think with so many different voices and eyes in the room that you'd end up with a product that just felt entirely incohesive, incomprehensible, disjointed. And I think that like we had a lot of fear about that, and somehow it just wasn't an issue. Like, to the point where now, like you said, 15 years later, we're talking about it and it's a surprise.
Yeah.
But it is the case that like this is one of the very few times that happened. And especially like by the time we got to Mass Effect 3 and we had heavy hitters calling off like the Kai Lang death or the opening for Mass Effect 3, those were all us, baby. And we could run circles around them at that time. But this, at the time that we made this scene, this was like me, Arm, Parrish, and like 2 months. And so we just kind of like threw our whole heart into it, and it worked out. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
I think the wildest example of that has to be the very opening of Mass Effect, where we're going from like Mass Effect 2, right? With the Normandy dying, the collectors show up, they blow the ship up. There's like that was an all hands on deck sort of thing. And ironically, if we're talking about the stuff that was at the first E3, it was this scene. And it was the opening of the game with the Normandy getting destroyed. That was our heavy hitter. And like, again, when I talk about things that were kind of set in stone and just right first time, like those were miracles.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Like that opening scene in Mass Effect, I actually noticed some difference, and I've noticed it over the years too, where there's the very first scene where Miranda's talking with the Elusive Man. And, you know, then see to it, he doesn't die, the Elusive Man says, or something like that. And then it goes to the next scene, which is the Normandy in space, and the Normandy gets blown up. But there's a considerable difference I noticed in some of the quality of the scenes between those, whereas it felt like, and maybe I'm making this up in my head, but it felt like that conversation with the Elusive Man and Miranda at the very beginning, that almost wasn't done in engine. Am I seeing that right? Because it had this certain cinematic quality to it where it didn't look like the game when you're playing it.
Oh no, that was definitely done in engine. But it was the case that it was a special flower, right? And that's the thing. Like in games, we specifically make sure that the first 3 hours of the game are really good. Now, the middle has to be good, the end has to be really good, but the first 3 hours have to be fantastic. And that being the opening of the game, like it got so much more attention, right?
Right, and that makes sense. You want to attract the attention of players, similar to what journalists are told with, writing articles. You write it in the inverted pyramid style, where you put the best, most enticing things at the very top.
Oh yeah, I think it's the case also. Like, if we had 5 years on Mass Effect 2, you'd be seeing The Last of Us, right? The idea of making a 60-hour game, and I say 60, but it's 30, but we had to double every line for genders, so it's fuzzy math. But the idea of doing that in 2 years, it's like, there's times when I look at my own work and I cringe, but then I'm like, oh, wait, but we did this and it came out. And so it really does become about picking your battles. And that's true for any game. And just to kind of cap off on that, one interesting thing I learned working on this game is because, like, the reason that we pushed so hard on the beginning of Mass Effect 2 and kind of getting you into the open world as fast as we could was entirely because I believe the metrics for Mass Effect 1 were that 70% of players stopped playing before they finished the Citadel. And so it was like, you would, yeah, right?
Wow.
Yes. And so it was just like, if you think about it, it makes sense. You kind of start that game on Eden Prime and you have some like fun combat and some cool RPG stuff. And then you hit the Citadel and you're like doing fetch quests for 4 hours almost. Especially if you don't know where to go and it's a very confusing level. And it was like, I think that over time, a lot of people went back and played it. But like back in 2008, it was like Mass Effect sold really well and nobody got past like Noveria.
Yeah, that's crazy. You're right. And just anecdotally, when I've spoken with different people who have played Mass Effect, but they'll tell me they didn't finish it, I'm like, where did you stop playing? And it's almost always one of two answers. The Citadel, soon as they get to the Citadel, because they're like, where am I? Or number two, Noveria, because the pace is slower, the level design is a little bit more especially if you're playing it now for the first time and going back, because games were just different then. I'm here talking, and I'm someone who loved Morrowind. I loved Morrowind, but I gotta be honest, like the directions that the characters gave you, the journal entries and whatnot, it was a horrible navigating system. It was terrible, and you just had to figure it out yourself. So in comparison, Mass Effect is a cakewalk, but I understand why people would get lost at that point.
Oh yeah, and again, awesome game. I think there's kind of a comparison between the promises of Mass Effect 1, where they were like, okay, you can go anywhere, but people weren't quite ready to be like, but actually there's like 5 main levels and you're going to be on each one for 3 hours. Whereas, again, when we're talking about pacing, Mass Effect 2, we came in and we said, okay, recruitment missions are 45 minutes, recruitment missions are 45 minutes and loyalty missions are 30 minutes. And there was a like extreme adherence to pacing on that, where we kind of just got it. And when we would take a level on paper, we would say, okay, here's the whole level on paper. Here's all the things that happen. This is 5 minutes. This is 2 minutes. This is 4 minutes. This is 9 minutes. This is 6 minutes. This is 1 minute. And then we'd say, oh, we're 2 minutes over. And it's like, okay, well, this dies. Right. And we would just make those very cutthroat decisions, because it was like, at the end of the day, we were all going to get good stuff in the game. And there's a poetry to letting go of your favorite ideas, because you know that you're still making all of the ideas. They're all your ideas. And it's a challenge to say, can I do good with other ideas than the ones I love the most? And that's a bit of a ramble, but it was wild.
Well, absolutely. And well, you can feel the pacing too in Mass Effect 2. You can feel the pacing speed up. And then by Mass Effect 3, it's like this dramatic, conclusion with space opera. But we'll get into that a little bit later. You had mentioned recruitment missions. Now, you were also involved in the Garrus recruitment mission too, right?
Yes. So if Thane acquisition is the first thing I ever worked on, and this scene with pushing out the window is the first thing I ever worked on, then I went on to Garrus acquisition. And this was my long war. It was the second thing I started, and it was the last thing I finished. I put 14 months into Garrus acquisition before we said this is a finished level.
Wow.
I did every single scene in that level like 10 times over. They changed the art 4 times. It was also it was one of the first levels we made, so we didn't know how to make it. And I had some of the most fun stuff on that level, right? Again, if we talk about interrupts, this was a very early time in figuring out what interrupts could be. And so you have the interrupt where you stab the guy in the back with the welding device.
Poor Sergeant
and he just
Kafka.
Yeah. That was so that was just like in the script. It was just like Shepard interrupts and kills Sergeant Kafka, and I was like, oh, what do I do with this? And so eventually, after like banging my head against it, because I had versions where he like shot him, I had versions where he like found a knife and stabbed him. And eventually I was like, okay, Kafka's working on the ship. He's like welding on it because I have this spark effect. I've got like 5 days this week to do this. So maybe he stabs him with the welding thing. And so he stabbed him with the welding thing. But at the time we didn't have a welding object. So I just grabbed whatever I could find, and I found this like long crane with like forks at the end. And I'm like, if I shrink that down, that kind of looks like a welding thing. And I just stuck it in there and he got zapped.
That's
and
amazing.
that came back to me 6 months later when the performance was toast in that level. And one of the engineers eventually found the problem, and he's like, Zach, why did you use a 250 polygon giant crane for a tiny wrench in this scene? And I'm like, oh no, what have I done? And so yeah, it was a fun one. And then you stab him, he falls down, gets shocked. I got to play with electricity, that was fun. And then you go and meet Garrus, and you have a number of weird interrupts in there. I remember specifically the day when I was like, oh, wait, so there was a scene where Garrus was like pointing out at the mercenaries that were coming up. And I'm like, okay, I can't really get a good camera angle because it's pretty far. So I'm like, okay, Garrus hands you his sniper rifle, and you just look through the scope and you see it. And so then I was working on the shot, and I'm like, well, I'm in the shot. I've got the scope pointed at a guy. It's centered up on the guy, and maybe I can just put an interrupt in here and you shoot the guy. And I did, and I was like, oh, this is great.
That worked so well, too. How did you actually get the camera shot through the scope? How did that work?
Oh, there's a secondary camera that's way closer to the guy, and then we just play a full screen effect on the thing to make it look like it's through a scope.
Incredible.
Totally camera tricks. Oh, no, that's we haven't gotten into it, but it's all camera tricks and animation tricks all over the place.
Oh, smoke and mirrors, huh?
Smoke,
awesome.
mirrors, and like use every part of the animal. Nothing goes to waste. Like I said, eventually we went back into that Thane acquisition in Mass Effect 3, and it's like, I need a guy dropping from a vent. Here's one, and we'd pull it out. And it was a lot of cutting things together that never should have worked together. Like, there's no animation for Garrus handing Shepard the sniper rifle. Instead, we would have Garrus's arms move like he's going to hand the sniper rifle to Shepard, and then you'd cut the camera, and Shepard's arms are moving like they're grabbing the sniper rifle, and it's already in their hands. Because that's hard. You can't just pop the sniper rifle to somebody else's hands, so you'd hide that with a camera cut. And then you need Shepard to walk to the window, and surprise, you don't have that animation either. So you'd have a camera shot of Shepard, and you'd have Shepard like walk off the right side of the screen, and then you'd teleport to the window, and you'd have Shepard walk in from the left side of the screen. And
the power of jump cuts.
It's exactly right. You would never know. You'd think that we had custom animation for all that walking. To cap off the walk animations thing, you kind of understand that the way that all those scenes in the dynamic parts of that game where you're making choices are stitched together with like poses, reused animations all over the place, walks, stands, pose, like arms crossed, all that stuff. Towards the end of Mass Effect 2, we did a command poll over the whole game, a program that ran through every scene in the game and said, what animations are used where, how many times? And so you'd get animations like point left, and that's used like 100 times.
Let me guess what that one is. That one is when Shepard or someone is talking in a cinematic one, and, for example, Shepard would say, I should go. And then turns left and walks exit stage left. Is that the one?
Well, so point left would be a hands-only thing. You're talking about exit right.
Right.
But specifically, the point is that point left, point right, those got used about 100 times. Head nods, like shaking your head, looking left, looking right, because we would do that too. You'd do the whole body, and then you'd do the head, right? Those would get used like 500, 600 times a piece throughout the game. And then you got to the animations wander north, wander south, wander east, and wander west, which just made Shepard. That's the one you're thinking of. By comparison to everything else, those 4 animations were each used around 12,000 times.
Oh,
so it's like,
God.
Yes. So there's like a scale thing where there's a curve you can draw between how much an animation is used in Mass Effect, and like 90% of them are in the hundreds, and then it just spikes as soon as anybody needs to walk. The first thing we did when we got to Mass Effect 3 was we said, all right, we're gonna go crazy, guys. We're gonna spend all the money. We're gonna get 4 more walking animations.
4 more walks. 4 more walks.
Yeah. Yes.
Amazing.
Oh, and they were just the same but slightly faster.
Slightly faster. There we go. Yeah, this is holy shit. Now this is some gourmet shit. So let's talk about Kasumi and Zaid's DLCs, right? Because I remember when I played these, there was a considerable jump in improvement in quality, like Kasumi's heist, right, or Zaid's revenge trip, and I could just tell that there was special care dedicated to these. Were these 2 always planned to be DLCs? And if so, did you get to use any new tools or tricks with these that weren't always available for the development of the rest of the game?
You have asked a very good question.
That's why they pay me the medium bucks.
So yeah, both of those are pretty interesting. So let's go into Zaid first and then Kasumi, because those are totally different stories. And the first thing I'll say is these guys weren't going to be in the game, and then we removed them to sell them. They were not going to be in the game. They didn't fit in the game. We had enough game to make already. But
yeah, it was 2 discs, right?
Yeah, we can get into that. But like, no, we made them after the fact. They were always work that we would use to fill between when the game goes gold and when we actually came out. Like, I think there was like a 3-month gap. And so Zaid, I finished Mass Effect 2. We finished the end game. We were extremely sad and tired. The game had not yet come out yet, so we didn't know that it was good. And then they said, hey, Zach, we got the Zaid mission. Let's go. And I'm like, okay, when do you need it done by? And they're like, Christmas. And I'm like, it's December 10th.
Tomorrow.
Yes. And so essentially Zaid's mission was entirely built within about 2 or 3 weeks. It was madness. And so it's really funny to hear that it was like a jump up in quality, because it was. But it's comparing work that took, like, if we look at Garrus, I had 14 months to think about Garrus, and I had 2 weeks to think about Zaid.
I've got the rest of my life to think about Garrus, but go on.
Yeah, we all have a place in our heart for him. But like specifically, the benefit is that by the time we got to Zaid, we knew how to make this game. And the reason it's good is, and the reason Mass Effect 3 is good is because Mass Effect 3 is what you get when a team knows what the hell they're making, and they can just make it. And so we got Zaid, and we said, this is going to be tight, but here's what we're going to do. And you know, I remember sitting in that room with John Dombrow, amazing writer, great friend, and being like, okay, these are our tent poles. It's about betrayal. We're going to have this big kick-ass betrayal scene. He's going to mess up these scientists, so we're going to get like a cool high-octane moment out of that. You're going to have a low beat somewhere in between. And we can probably only budget like 3 or 4 of these. And so we did. And everything you see in that level is essentially our first take on all of it. And it's wild that a first take comes out good.
Yeah, absolutely. And that revenge scene, I was just like keeping that in my mind while you were talking about it. Like I can just hear Zaid now, you know, burn, you son of a bitch.
So we had birds, and so I said I'm going to do a John Woo scene and have the doves fly by Zaid when he points the gun and shoots it. And I had a little decal that looked like oil, so I figured I was going to light the whole ship on fire and explode it. And I had to make a stupid little environment for the inside of that helicopter because we never made the back of it. But I needed him to be. I needed one shot of the guy like in the helicopter realizing he's about to explode, and it was just like a feverish push through it. And again, when I say I had like 2 weeks on that level, that was like 5 scenes. So that's not 2 weeks on just that scene. That scene was like 3 days.
Wow.
But that's what I mean when I say like, give us 5 years, man. We'd give you Last of Us.
That's like a lot of coffee, a lot of Monster Energy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of something.
Yeah, right. Well, I could also tell that you worked very hard on Shadow Broker DLC as well, right? And this had a lot of cool techniques in lighting. I noticed huge advances in lighting when I was playing through the Shadow Broker DLC. And I feel like you can tell the improvement in quality right before, like, this is one of those moments where you can just really tell in the cinematics. Right when we get to the broker's base that's floating above the planet Hagalaz. It's like in that stormy atmosphere, right? And so I have a clip here. Let's watch this and we'll talk about it.
The oceans boil during the day, then snap freeze 10 minutes after sundown.
The Shadow Broker lives in this?
His ship follows the sunset, completely undetectable in the storm, unless you know where to look.
How do we get inside?
The shuttle bay is locked down. We'll need to land on the ship and hunt for a hatch. But we can't stay outside for long. There's a constant lightning storm where the hot and cold air collide.
Whoa, the screen froze. Don't worry. It's just me, Tom, in the middle of the show because I wasn't there. I had to go to my wife's sister's wedding preparation thing. She's getting married tomorrow. I totally missed out on another interview. I'm so sorry I missed this, but I get to edit it and watch it and remind you to sign up on the Patreon, patreon.com/Mass Effect Lorecast. And we have to shout out our Shepherd tier patrons, Edboy, Kira C, Lieutenant Tessino, and William. Thank you so much for your support. I'm not going to do any of the review reading or anything this week. It's a massive episode. We're just dumping this big one episode right now, the whole thing for you to check out. We've thought about dividing it up around 2 weeks. I have to take next week off. I've got some other stuff going on. So we just wanted to put it out there as soon as possible for everybody. We hope you enjoy it. Go back, continue watching. We're going to continue from here. See you later.
And wow, like that. So that right there is the original Mass Effect 2 from that scene. That's not Legendary Edition. And so I wanted to ask, why do we notice this, like this change in lighting quality, this change in it just feels like a really well put together DLC.
Okay. There's so many things in that clip that are just bringing me back. Oh, I'm tagged I'm paused at the end and I can see that the like thrusters under the ship aren't lined up quite right.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah. Oh, no, hang on. I'll get back to you on the lighting, but let me walk you through that as I experience.
Sure.
First off, those exterior shots, shuttle flying up, God, I love the compositing job they did on that. It's beautiful, right? I wish we had the ability to have done them in 4K back in 2008, but like, God, those are gorgeous. And then we cut inside the shuttle. And I'm going to tell you that when we hit Mass Effect 3, I said, give me a better looking interior of this shuttle. Like, oh, there's something very specific about how how a developer uses pixels and polygons and stuff, where even on older hardware like this, you can still make something look amazing. Kojima does it all the time by making sure the polygons are where the camera is pointing. And I'm looking at a starving child in terms of this shuttle in these scenes, looking at like the way all the textures apply. It's also funny getting into the lighting. Like this is good for Mass Effect 2, but like we had so much. This is where we were held back by the technology, right? And it bugged me in the Thane example, where if you see Shepard in a lot of those shots, we have almost a totally black shadow face on Shepard, right? Where you get these extremely harsh shadows. And so there's a reason behind that. And that's also the reason why this looks better, is because we got better at dealing with it. When you were working on an Xbox 360 and you're in 2008 and Unreal sucks, you can't light everything dynamically, especially characters. And so we had this wild way of lighting a character where we're lighting these characters without lights. So if you imagine that the character model is, okay, oh, this is going to be wild. Has a physicist ever told you that a cow is a sphere?
What?
Because at a certain resolution, a cow is a sphere. For physics purposes, if you're taking out all the math, it's just a lump of something that weighs a certain amount of kilograms and is a certain volume. And by the same token, so is a Mass Effect character. If you imagine every Mass Effect character is actually just a sphere, we are just coloring that sphere and applying that to the whole character mesh in a way that doesn't make sense. I'm really stretching it, even trying to explain it, but it is to say that when I'm lighting a character in Mass Effect 2, I'm using a bespoke system that has no instruction manual, and I was the one like doing a lot of this lighting stuff, and it's unwieldy, and I'm basically saying, okay, how is this character lit? Well, he's lit orange at an angle of 121 at a direction of like 19, and that's nonsense.
Right.
And it would change shot to shot. And aside from that, we had no ambient lighting. So wherever there's a shadow, it's just blindingly dark. You don't see any detail in it. And then to cap that last bit off is that, like, if you look at the eyes in this scene, and you know how Disney eyes have the big white spot on them that really like makes them feel alive?
Yes.
Looking at the eyes in this scene, if you were to go back, I would say that Shepard looks like Hannibal Lecter in terms of how his eyes are lighting.
His eyes were very dark, yeah.
Yes, and so it's kind of I guess the answer is that it's a learning experience, because I think we did, like, this is not bad, and I think that part of the reason this works is because we're really nailing the color match to the awesome storm. We're not overblowing it, but I really do miss a couple of like spots that we added to the shuttle later on. But yeah, it's yeah.
While
it's
we're
wild.
talking about
the answer to your question is that it's insanely technical and held back by the technology of its time.
Well, I was going to say, it sounds like you can only play the cards you're dealt, right? But you guys played a hell of a hand in Lair the Shadow Broker. And I want to go over two other scenes in this one. Number one, there's this scene with Liara where it just feels like this dialogue with her is so different. And I can't quite put my finger on it. I feel like maybe you know some background here, right? So let's go ahead and bring up this scene, and we'll talk afterward.
Sony had retrieved the data. Civilian casualties not a concern.
Vasir's dead.
I'm putting the data through to the Normandy's computers. We can be at the Shadow Broker's base in a few hours. He'll know about Vasir before long, if he decides to kill Farron.
We'll get Farron out of there alive, Liara. I promise.
I know. You're here to help. Just like always.
That's not a good thing?
When we first met on Therum, you saved me from the Geth. You fought a Krogan battlemaster while I cowered. Now you're doing it again. And I'm still leaning on you for help.
That's what friends do, Liara.
I can get us there based on Sakat's data. The Normandy's stealth drive will keep them from detecting us. The Shadow Broker's agents are still shooting their way through Ilium. With luck, they won't notice we've left until it's too late.
That's a little cold. They killed innocent people.
You know what I mean.
Do I? When I hit the ground back at the trade center, you went after Vizier without a backward look.
A little fall wasn't going to kill you. I had to stay on Vizier. I had to stay rational, make the call, like I did with Sakat.
That's Vizier's fault, not yours.
Sakat had no idea what the stakes were. I put him in harm's way to get the data I needed. I got him killed. And I'd do it again. But from here on out, things will be simple. Get in, get Farron, get out. And kill anyone who tries to stop us.
That's it?
That's it.
Will you just stop for a second? We'll be jumping several light years. There's time to talk.
About what?
You haven't been the same since I came back, Liara.
What do you want me to say, Shepard? That I mourned you? That I feel guilty because Farron got captured? I made mistakes. I lost people. I helped get you back. And I want to do the same for Farron. I'll sit and talk once he's safe. Until then, enjoying the scenery is an insult to the man who saved both of us.
Okay, let's go.
Wow. Okay. So right there, first of all, I want to address the fact that there was a glitch in that clip where Liara isn't, she like pops up while they're walking. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about that. Yeah. Remember how I mentioned this game is wildly complicated? I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Sometimes we didn't always get to test all the branches. And that's not to say that, like, we did test all the branches, but there is a thing in this game that we eventually got better at where if you start a line and then you continue the next line, sometimes some animation from the previous line bleeds over, right? And eventually, you know, there was a specific day when I woke up in the middle of the night. I was like, oh my God, we have to send a robot back in time to kill the animation before it happens. And we did implement that feature, but it means like sometimes if you go through things in a certain path, one of those leftover animations will be like sending Liara be underneath the map because like two things are multiplying together. And it's really funny whenever, like, honestly, yeah, I killed maybe 1,000 problems, and you know, there's still so many that got through.
Oh yeah. But yeah, second of all, I did want to talk about right at the end of that clip where it has the over-the-shoulder shot from Shepard, and you have Liara's face in prime view in that shot, and the lighting is hitting her face in such a way that it's almost evocative of old Hollywood. Do you remember old Hollywood shots with like black and white shots? I'm talking like, you know, Gone with the Wind, where all of the lighting would hit the actresses in the most golden, soft way. And that's kind of how it felt with Liara right there.
Oh, yes. So that's because we made Ilium, or is that Ilium? I think it's Ilium. No, it's something
Ilium,
else.
yes.
It is Ilium. Okay. Yeah, that's because we made sure Ilium was in golden hour. I think this scene really works for lighting because we made sure that like the sun direction would be solid. You've got that awesome vista of the city. You got that beautiful sun. And like, honestly, the number one reason why most of the lighting that hits is because you can understand where it's coming from. And so the exterior, like everything was set up well for us. I would also say that this scene is like, when I say we really knew how to make these games, a lot of games that take this strategy of branching dialogue, lots of gesture stuff, they'll really double down on the animation, on the facial stuff, but you'll have characters mostly stationary. The thing we chose to do for Mass Effect, and you'll see this time and time again, is that we wanted interesting staging changes throughout. So in this example, you've got two characters face to face, and then they're kind of spread apart at a distance, and then you've got a walk and talk, and then you've got a chasing shot, and then they both lean on a railing. And it's like 2 minutes, but we were always very specific about planning all that stuff out so that you had something that was logical. You had something where you couldn't like go down a dialogue tree and then like end up in some weird state where you teleported across the whole room. Like that's the stuff that we really, really like where our work was that makes things shine. Like that's the thing that makes up for lesser animation and limited graphics is that we're actually you could redo the scene with real actors and the same blocking, and it's an amazing scene.
Exactly. That's exactly the way to describe it, too, because it felt natural. The blocking in that scene, the walk and talk, like you said. And speaking of which, John Ebinger had let me in on a little tip and said that this was one of the few scenes, if not the only one, up until that point in Mass Effect where there had been interrupts during a walk and talk.
Yep. It's really hard because he's moving. And when you hit that interrupt button, so let's say Shepard crosses 30 feet during the time that interrupt is on. As soon as you hit that interrupt button, that camera is going to cut to whatever the result is. And so is that result going to be 5 feet into it or 20 feet into it or 30 feet into it? And so depending on the environment, that can really trip people up in terms of like, wait, Shepard just walked past that guy, but then I hit the interrupt and now he's behind that guy. Like these are the things that we were most concerned about. Like
continuity.
There's all the bug fix. Yeah, continuity. Exactly. Especially in a game like Mass Effect, like where it's a quantum math problem at all times.
Yeah. Wow. And that scene, extremely well done. Very, very, emotional for anyone that's invested in those characters. And I think, how natural it is. It really plays into that. But I want to talk about this final reveal of the broker and then the final fight with the Shadow Broker as well. So we have this clip up. Let's watch this. And I've got a couple of questions about it specifically. So let's see it.
Reckless, just determined. Ask your Asari Spectre about that.
Basir was expendable. All her death cost me was time.
Expendable like Farron?
Dr. Tassoni, your interference caused all this. Farron betrayed me when he handed you Shepard's body. The Drell is simply paying the price.
Someone was bound to come after you for working with the Collectors.
It was a mutually beneficial partnership. Fortunately, the Normandy's IFF will let me salvage the remains of the Collector's base.
It'll be pretty hard to run a base this size with no crew.
They're replaceable. Your arrival is barely an interruption. Enough talk. My operations are too crucial to be compromised by a traitor.
You're quite confident for someone with nowhere left to hide.
You travel with fascinating companions, Doctor. Thank you for bringing me the guests to Sony. Cerberus undervalued its selling price.
You're not putting a hand on anyone.
It's pointless to challenge me, Asari. I know your every secret, while you fumble in the dark.
Is that right? You're a Yogg, a pre-spaceflight species quarantined to their homeworld from massacring the Council's first contact teams. This base is older than your planet's discovery, which probably means you killed the original Shadow Broker 60 years ago. Then took over. I'm guessing you were taken from your world by a trophy hunter who wanted a slave. Or a pet. How am I doing?
Ruh-roh, he's big mad. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about that one because I noticed Shadows had a lot to play with in that scene when we were first meeting the broker. And I also noticed another thing, but I wanted to talk about Shadows since we were just talking about the complexity of that.
Oh, I have the saddest, most disappointing answer for this one, but it's a fun one. You notice how he's like at the table the whole time with his arms crossed?
Mm-hmm.
How many animations do you think we had to work with when we put this together for that? So again, I love, God, the Shadow Broker is so good. The idea of the Yogg being like they're pre-space flight. How are they here? Why are they here? The idea of like you've stumbled across like the Predator, but without the technology, and he's just like a badass who's like also super intellectual.
Yeah, absolutely. He's like a puppet master.
Yeah, absolutely my favorite thing that's in the whole game. But again, he's the Shadow Broker, so he's got to be in Shadow. We specifically made sure that he would be in Shadow. There's a bunch of bright objects behind him, and Shepard and Liara are in the light pretty strongly, and the Shadow Broker is not. And again, that's partially thematic and partially to we didn't have a lot of animations, so it helps to hide detail. But God, I love his facial rig. That was the most fun guy to work with. You don't understand how hard I campaigned to get a Yogg somewhere in Mass Effect 3.
Really?
It is one of my pet projects that never came through on Mass Effect 3 was, aside from everything else that I was doing, which was too much, I wanted there to be a space arc somewhere on the galaxy map. And you'd never be told that it was there. You'd just encounter it. And when you docked with it, there would be a Yogg who's like, I'm just a Yogg. I have a bad feeling about these Reapers. Have you heard about these Reapers? I found out about these Reapers. They're bad. So I'm just like, of my own accord, making a space arc. And so the space arc would just be full of all the aliens that we'd never used in Mass Effect 3. I think you have the Shifty Cow behind you in the picture right there.
I do. Yes, that is the Shifty Space Cow.
Yeah. So it would have been where we have the Shifty Space Cow. I didn't get a Varen into Mass Effect 3, so it would have been where the Varen are. It would have been where all of like the gas bags from Eden Prime. I would have just used the whole ship to just stick every unused asset that we hadn't already used in the game in there. And so, yeah, I'm very, very close to the Yogg. But that didn't obviously ship, so that's a bummer.
Right.
But like
with the Yogg, were those custom animations or were those repurposed? Because we'd never seen a Yogg before.
Oh, no, that's what I mean, is we had to make all custom stuff. You couldn't just stick human or Krogan animations on it. The Yogg is like super wide, and his legs are even more complex than a Krogan or Tally, so he doesn't quite work. And so, yeah, we had to make the decision to be like, while he's talking to you, he's stationary, because we can only afford his like combat set. I did get more animations for him in Mass 3, but I think the only Yogg, I think there is one Yogg you see on like the Solarian planet, maybe?
Yes, he breaks out of containment.
Yeah. So we did get a little bit of him in there, but that was like weird Yogg in a diaper. I always make fun of that guy.
He's the incontinent Yogg. Not nearly as capable as the Shadow Broker, clearly. Now, I wanted to skip a little bit back, actually. There's a specific scene right at the beginning of Mass Effect 2. It's after Shepard wakes up. They're riding with Jacob and Miranda inside the shuttle, the interior of which I know you're a huge fan of. And she insists on quizzing Shepard about their memory of the events of Mass Effect 2. So if we imported a save, why is Miranda still asking us what happened here?
Yep, we found this one out quite by accident. As soon as we started Mass Effect 2, we said, okay, it took like 8 months to get the thing working that loads your save from Mass Effect 1. And basically we were like, oh, this is going to be awesome. We got your save from Mass Effect 1. It pulls every choice that you made throughout the game. We can even pick how your Shepard looks. Like, we can carry all that stuff through. And I can't stress enough how big that is. Like, point to another game that's even tried.
I had never known of another game that even tried that. That was revolutionary.
It was revolutionary. It was unnecessary. It was so much more expensive than it should have been. And I'm so glad we did it. And when you play Mass Effect 1, you beat Saren, and then the game saves an autosave, and then you choose who the counselor is, and it doesn't save. So the last save in Mass Effect 1 is before you choose who Udina and Anderson are.
Oh my God. And so by that point in Mass Effect 2, when the team was working on it, it was too late to like go back and just put another autosave in Mass Effect 1.
Absolutely, right. So we had to stick you on the shuttle, and we had to ask you a couple of questions just to like check again.
That makes sense. And like I always, when I was playing through it, I always just kind of assumed that like, oh, okay, well, obviously if people were jumping in Mass Effect 2 and they never played Mass Effect 1, this is the conversation that would happen. Maybe they just like forgot to take this out for players who imported a save. So I just like, overlooked it, no problem. But I did want to ask because it did stood out to me. I'm like, she should know this.
Yeah. I mean, especially considering you've been dead for 2 years and she's not.
Right. Well, we're just testing you. I mean, that was a genius. That was a genius narrative way to kind of hide that. That's awesome. So jumping then to the end of Mass Effect 2, what was the biggest challenge and the biggest payoff of that suicide mission escape scene, specifically after the Human Reaper is taken down and pretty much the entire rest of the cinematics after that?
Oh, what are you talking? That was all easy, man. The Reaper baby is where things were hard. And then after that, it was smooth sailing. We had to, it's the choices that were trouble. And once you did the Reaper baby and you beat that boss and you decided whether or not you were going to blow him up or not. And I did do that scene too. I did the Elusive Man scene where you choose. It was just smooth sailing. But actually, let me circle in on that specific scene where you beat the Reaper and then Shepard, I don't even know if Shepard's in it. Oh no, it can go three ways. Either Shepard shows up and he says, we killed the Reapers or something and blow this stuff up. Or Shepard shows up and he's like, oh no, keep this thing. Or like Shepard died and Joker shows up. And so I did that scene. And when I got that scene, it could really only play out two ways. Shepard shows up or Joker shows up. And then depending on if you were good or bad, it was just all the same. And I was like, this isn't sauce. We need to go harder than this. Let's put some pepper on this. And so I'm like, okay, I got the Elusive Man. I got Shepard. I'm in this room. How do I change things? And so I looked at Mass Effect 1 and I looked at the end of that game. And basically, depending on if you take the Renegade or Paragon ending of that game, the final thing with Shepard is like he's in front of like either a more red screen or a more blue screen. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to mess with the sun behind the Elusive Man. And if you're Paragon, it's going to be blue. And if you're Renegade, it's going to be red.
Oh, so you were responsible for that.
Even worse than that, I never asked permission. and Casey Hudson found out about it, the executive producer of the game, and he's like, what's this stuff? What's this? What's going on with the sun?
Well,
and by then it was like, it was too late. It was way too late.
Well,
I couldn't put it back.
I think you snuck a good one by Casey because that was great. And I think everyone loves that. Everyone, at least that I've spoken to who plays the games, because it's, it's respondent to your choices, which is like the entire spirit of Mass Effect success, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah. And it's like even the small things like a color change, what can we do to respect the player's choices? Because like the magic trick isn't that we came up with all this crazy stuff. It's that the stuff we came up with accurately reflects what you wanted to happen. And maybe you didn't want the sun to turn blue behind the Elusive Man. That's a really weird thing to want. But it is a vibe that respects how you played the game. And it was a very specific thing for me in the final days of that game, especially because I was very tired, to say, okay, I'm not going to stand for like, this can only go two ways. I'm at least going to change the sun and I'm going to change a couple of other things so that like, if you map it out, it goes at least 6 ways. Small differences, but like those were our wins. And that was, I guess that's maybe my most daring heist of the project.
You were listening to your own version of The End Run by Jack Wall. That, by the way, killer song for that ending stretch of Mass Effect. I have that on my like Spotify library saved, and every now and then it comes up while I'm driving home from work, and I have to fight the strong urge to just put my pedal to the floor because that song is so kick-ass.
Yeah, you don't think I'm like in a constant state of anxiety given how many like podcasts and YouTube shows and like speed run guys just use Mass Effect music as like their backing tracks? Like I'll be listening to somebody talk about Fallout and it's like, I just hear the menu music in the background, and I'm like, this isn't even the right game. Like, Fallout has music you could use in your video, but you've chosen to use Mass Effect music just because it's like the perfect backing music at all time.
Right, and now you've triggered like instant memories for me, like walking by the microwave and the metal plate in my head is sparking. Yeah.
It's God. Some days it feels like that. I will say also, I got to put a lot of praise on Trevor Gilday, I believe, was the one who made the sun behind the Elusive Man, which is like still 15 years later, like my favorite visual effect in a video game. And like, that's the other reason that I had to change the color of that sun, was because I'm like, I want to make anything I can do to make the sun more interesting. It's such an interesting thing.
Oh, I love those shots. I have so many screenshots of the Elusive Man, the silhouette of him smoking a cigarette with the sun behind him, because it is just one of the coolest shots. And I noticed that there's actually a couple different moments in Mass Effect where we have that strong lighting behind a character's silhouette and profile where they're easily recognizable, but it's so striking. And one of the other ones is in the bay, the engineering bay where Jack is staying. And Jack, there's this scene, I don't know if you're familiar or if it's evocative in your mind, with the strong red lighting behind Jack's profile. And that is just such a powerful technique that almost always pays off. It did in Mass Effect anyway.
Oh yeah, I would. So that scene is Edward Douglas, and that was that was his baby. He was very, very good about like making sure Jack got just the coolest layer of paint that he put on her. And it really pays off. Jack is maybe my favorite in terms of the Normandy crew, and she's not one that I worked on. He absolutely wanted to nail it with that red lighting, and he would love to hear that it kicked ass. And again, that was choice. Those were all choices we made. Like, that's kind of the wild thing that's over all of it, is like cinematic design as a small department was very scrappy. We had so many challenges and nowhere near the resources we needed to do. But we had to do it all so fast that when somebody had to make a choice, there wasn't even time to ask. Like with the sun in Elusive Man, it was like, oh no, just like go. So it was completely unique in that me and everybody else in that team would step into that office and we'd step into a brand new scene that we've never touched, and we'd direct it, we'd block it, we'd light it, we'd do the effects, and we'd animate it, and we'd move on to the next thing in 2 days. And that was empowering, right? It's like you think about a director on a scene in a TV show. That director is thinking about that scene for maybe 6 months, and they're having anxiety about all the fights they have to do with all the stakeholders and shareholders and getting things and dealing with producers. And with Mass Effect 2, it was like, Zach, what do you got for us? Okay, I can use that. What else you got? Okay, what else you got? What else you got? And I'd be like, okay, just throw me stuff, right? And they'd throw me scripts, and it'd be like, oh, we need Shepard to like punch this guy. And I'm like, I don't have a good punch for you, but I have a kick. Can I use a kick? And then they'd be like, all right, a kick. And then I'd be like, all right. And now the other guy's going to kick back or something. And I'd start to develop stuff that was just never on the script. And that stuff was seen as a value add. And I think that is fundamental to when I say that project was special. So much of it is tied up in like, they gave me and 10 other people like carte blanche to just try. And we put our blood, sweat, and tears into every single bit of it. And so the lighting on Jack was a very specific choice by Ed, and it was the right choice. That's a choice I super support.
And you know what? It's so special hearing that like so many different team members had the authority to make those decisions, and decisions that are so beloved even now, 15 years later, 13 years later, where they're the things that I remember about the game, right? And it's a special thing because in the narrative, especially through Mass Effect 2 to 3, there's such a strong narrative theme of this game really isn't just about Shepard. It's about everyone around Shepard who was special. And so especially if you go Paragon, right? There's such a strong teamwork mentality that's like the teamwork is why this story is so special. And so hearing that that's also why it was so special behind the scenes, I think a lot of people are going to be touched to hear.
Oh yeah, and it's like, I mean, you mentioned that you had interviewed John Ebinger, and you talked to him about the Morden scene where he had Morden sing, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Is I believe he talked about how he was like, oh, I wanted Morden to sing, and so then Morden sang, and that is completely unique within games. I've only ever had that one other time, and it was like the opposite of healthy. That was, I won't get into it, but that was when I worked for Telltale, and we had the same sort of freedom, but it was because we had to make an hour of game every month.
Oh, sure. And you know,
but it was
when I've been in situations like that, yeah, I can definitely identify. In fact, some of the smaller shops I ever worked for in my day job, when I was given the authority, it turned out great. But it can go either way. And you know, speaking of things that can change and go either way, from Mass Effect 2 to 3, we see this difference, this huge shift in tone. You know, just as players. Come Mass Effect 3, it's heavier. It has more gravitas. Like I think I said to John Ebinger, it goes from Michael Bay, kick-ass explosion, hell yeah, in Mass Effect 2, to more like it was directed by Christopher Nolan, like a Christopher Nolan film in Mass Effect 3. And I wanted to ask, you know, how that translated at all to your work and any examples you can remember.
Well, we did have Clint Mansell, so that helped a little bit to feel more like Christopher Nolan. But it was definitely, we took that game more seriously. We came out of the Mass 2 as like, we started Mass 2 as like pretenders because we weren't there for Mass 1. Some of us were, but the majority of us weren't. And then we came out of that being like, oh no, we got this. And so we entered Mass 2 and we said, here's our tent poles. Here's what we really want to drive through. And it was shocking how much some of that, like, just all comes through. When you talk about the difference in pacing, it comes right back to Casey Hudson being like, Mass Effect 2 is about the Manhattan Project and building the nuclear bomb to destroy the Reapers. And it's about how, you know, it's like how America took all the top scientists and put them all in a room and built the nuclear bomb to win World War II. That was a specific thing that we said, and we had pictures of the room where they built the atomic bomb, and that was like a through line metaphor. And we put stakes on that to say like, oh yeah, the game, hey, you know, we did better at pulling you through the story at the start of Mass Effect 2, but how do we like make sure you care about the story right off the bat? Oh, well then the first thing they do is they attack Earth, and you're going to spend the whole game to take back Earth. And it's a simple thing, but it worked in its straightforwardness. And yeah, honestly, it's the funny thing is we talk about how cool and dark it is, and it's like there's things we didn't do that were way cooler and way darker too.
Well, I don't know. That Leaving Earth scene is pretty dark.
The Leaving Earth scene is pretty dark. I'm going to give some credit to a scene that was never made, just because I always wish it was. There was an amazing Matt Rhodes piece of concept art that was one of the first things we saw, where, because you remember Mass Effect 2, Shepard works for Cerberus, and Mass Effect 3, Shepard does not work for Cerberus. Cerberus owned the Normandy SR2.
Yes.
And so one of the earliest pieces of concept art was a idea of a scene that never got made, where like Shepard and the whole crew were like standing in space on the exterior of like another ship that had like Normandy painted on the side, and you could see in the distance the real Normandy, and they were going to steal back the Normandy. And it's like, God, I wish we had made that scene. Like, holy crap.
Yeah.
But that was in our heads, right? It was like, oh no, we are coming into this game. We need to save everybody. Everybody will, like, nobody will give us credit. Every single alien race is out for their own survival, and we need to come into this like serious people. And that is like how we told the story, and that is how we made the game. And like, like I said, it was a perfect culmination of like all the freedom that I talk about, all the pressures that we had, and all the like clarity that we had of knowing what we needed to make, right? As soon as John came on the game, he was like, well, Morden is important to me. These moments in Morden are important to me. We also know they're going to resonate. Let's make sure they're in there. And Mass Effect is 1,000 of those, right? Mass Effect 3 specifically. And so, yeah, maybe you can refocus me down to the darkness of it. I mean, we started that game with like Shepard finds a kid and he explodes, and that's pretty dark. So, yeah, it was an intentional thing. But like, even beyond that, again, I'm gonna throw more praise towards McVinney. Like the whole opening of Mass Effect 3 is awesome, right? The whole like the council gets the tribunal gets exploded. You're following Anderson on the outside of these buildings. We're really punching way above BioWare's weight class at that time for eating Gears of War's lunch, kind of. Running around with all these high octane things, and like the wildest part is like, oh yeah, when like Shepard runs down the bit after you kill that last Reaper thing, and he like slides over the cover and the ship flies in really low and Shepard like jumps across.
Oh yeah.
That's cinematic design. That's not high-end animation. That's McVinney and that's like just blood, sweat, and tears. And that was how we opened that game. And like everybody was bringing that to the table. And that just, good. Sorry.
No,
This
I was
is the story.
Say, that scene specifically with that low flyover by the Normandy was like, whoa, that it gives you such perspective and such like, I don't know, immersion that, this is how intense it is. And like, that also what a great pilot Joker is, right? That he can bring in such a huge ship that close to the surface. And then you got this dramatic scene, right? With the hangar bay open, Shepard standing on that, looking at Anderson saying, what are you doing? You coming with me? And then it's a little cheesy, but it's amazing. The Anderson tossing the dog tags at Shepard and saying, consider yourself reinstated. I mean, I think it was like every red-blooded American was like, hell yeah. Even though that's like, such strong Canadian influence on the game.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the Canadian influence is a whole other thing. But that was, I as soon as you tell me that story, I'm like, man, those dog tags, what a nightmare that little chain on those dog tags were.
Really? Why I never knew this. What was the problem with them?
Because we didn't have one, and somebody had to like make a whole tiny little chain that only appeared in one scene, and it had to have like floppy animation, and nothing in the game was like that. So it's like, it's a trivial thing, but like if nobody's ever done it in the game, then they have to learn how to do it. And so I remember like it was broken, and then somebody had to learn how to properly do a little chain necklace, and then it worked. But that was like 2 months.
Yeah, I can imagine the physics of that would have been a little tough because it's a chain, right? It's not going to be rigid if it hits someone's hand.
I think we were like, can somebody make this like a hologram or something?
So, there's another scene, we're talking about, impactful ones. There's another scene where I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Actually, I want to ask about, how can you tell me about the fates of the different characters? Like, because there has to be a lot riding on the team, in not just in terms of the writing, like the writers deciding the fates of the characters, but depicting them, right? So what was the direction on the characters' ultimate fate scenes like? And I'm talking about, Morden, I'm talking about Samara, I'm talking about Tali. What kind of feel was the team going for?
Okay, so I want to give the most respect to the most. I would say that the tone people were going for was just completeness. And honestly, this ties into the most shocking part of Mass Effect 3, which is, I mean, if Mass Effect 2 was like, oh my God, they love it. Mass Effect 3 was like, oh my God, they all broke at the last like 5 minutes. And it's really kind of, it stung for years because people said we hadn't paid off enough in the game. And when you ask me about the fates of every single character, it's that we, like, again, I told you a story about how I wanted to grab all the unused animal models and find a place for them. So yeah, we wrapped up the Genophage. We wrapped up the Geth Quarian thing. We wrapped up everything. Like, I think there's even like a Hanar plot wrap up somewhere in there. And the stuff we couldn't dedicate full scenes to, like, even though people have like the war effort thing is what it is, but that was also another avenue where our writing team was just like, okay, well, they got to know about this. They got to know about that. We have to have a statement on this. And it was like, no, we end this game. We're the whole universe could be blown up. So we're like, the franchise is good and we know it's going to come back someday, but like, we're not going to leave anything on the table. And honestly, that probably hurt Andromeda. But like, it was everything, right? It was, let me go into Rex, right? So I made sure that Rex had a ending. I'm the one who did Rex coming to like get revenge on you on the Citadel.
No, I know that scene. God, the heartstrings just like rip out my heart and stomp on it. I've never been strong enough to choose to betray Rex, but I have seen the clips on YouTube, and I gotta hear about this.
It's a good scene. That scene was like, that was one of the ones where it's like, this has to be in here. I don't give a shit how hard I'm going to work on it. It's got to be good. It's got to be cool. It's got to be Rex. And like, even, you know, the way that scene plays out is like you and God, what was his name? He was the Battlestar guy. He's the Sentinel security. So, Bailey. I was going to call him Saltai, which is not his Mass Effect name. But like, he's there with you, and eventually, like, Rex shows up being like, I know what you did. And Shepard's like, come on. And Rex is like, that shit don't fly. And eventually you have to kill Rex. But I made sure, like, oh no, you shoot Rex and he's a Krogan, so he's not going to die. You need to like shoot him, and then he's got to go out a window and like fall to his death. And that was like the dramatically pulled back version of that scene. I told you earlier how I wanted to have all the animals that weren't used in Mass Effect 3 somewhere. So Rex was originally going to Rex. I did the scene this way first time where Rex, like, that door opens and you find Rex on the Citadel and he's got like 2 Varens on a leash, and he like let one through and it would immediately kill a Citadel security guy and like drag him away. And Rex would be like, "What's up, Shepard?"
Holy crap.
And he'd be like holding back this slobbery Varen. And then eventually another guy came in and he like let that one go and it took that guy out. And honestly, man, I wish that had gotten through. But like, that's every scene is like whatever we could come up with that felt awesome and felt really true to the character, we would throw that in. And that's the Morden scene, right? It's the sometimes a guy shows up with dogs, sometimes a guy sings opera.
Yeah, and like the betraying Morden scene, you know, John had told me and told us that, you know, he had included in that scene, if you betray Morden and shoot him in the back, you're using the same pistol he gave you in Mass Effect 2, which is like, you know, between the Morden betrayal scene and the Rex betrayal scene, there's such a similarity there where, like, the only way I can describe it is with another scene in Star Wars, and you know the one I'm talking about when I say, like, Anakin, you're breaking my heart. Like, it felt so like that as the player because, I don't know, I guess I'm a Boy Scout, but, like, watching those 2 renegade scenes play out, it was like, man, I hate doing that, but at the same time, I like those scenes better than doing the right thing because they're so impactful. They make me feel, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think obviously the most interesting Shepard is a messy Shepard. And I think that kind of is actually reflected in, like, by no intention of our own, we kind of expected people to play Shepard like, I'm a good guy, I'm always going to choose the good answer, or I'm an asshole, I'm always going to choose the asshole answer. But like, no, people picked the choices that were the ones they felt they believed in. And that's, again, that goes back to the writing. And that's kind of the messy thing is like, we wanted to make a game where every time you had a choice, it was a really hard choice. And it would be, you know, 50-50 one way or the other. but we made a game with statements and personality, and turns out people have a much more nuanced experience with conversation and dialogue and relationships that we even, again, put me on that game again. And there's so many learnings we've found out. But like, people just, they found their way through that game based on how they experienced it. And even as hard as us as the developers wanted, to make you think like, oh, Morden's an arrogant mad scientist who's just playing God. It's like, no, he's like he's a tortured soul. He's hurt. He wants to do good. We made him an alien race with like a tragic lifespan, and like, we're not even getting too deep into that, but that's always just in there because that's kind of, again, a lot of praise for the writing. If I don't speak about it any other time, if people are not aware, you are probably very aware. Mass Effect and BioWare as a whole were not like other game studios. Another game studio will have a writer on who's like a guy who's also like co-writing a novel in his spare time, who's like not in the building and just like shows up every 6 months to give you scripts. And Mass Effect we had 10 guys, we had 10 writers, and there was a writer in there who was specifically the like science fiction math guy, right? And everybody, and there was, and Patrick was the musical theater guy, right? And it was, we had such a hard problem that we couldn't fall into some of the bad habits of the game industry. We just had to like take artists as they came and let them art. And again, the writing is it's writing. It's not games writing. It's like, oh, you put this in a novel and it's good. Again,
yeah. Well,
Drew wrote many.
The art showed, right? And so I wanted to talk about, since we were talking about interrupts earlier, there were a couple of characters where if you don't make this paragon saving interrupt in time, and it's a fast one, then it ends in absolute tragedy. Like Samara on the monastery in Mass Effect 3. Of course, if you don't make that paragon interrupt in time, she ends her own life. Can you tell me what it was like working on, not just, if you weren't on that scene specifically, but on similar scenes? Can you tell me what it was like having to navigate tastefully designing such sad, poignant scenes like that? So there's this other thing, this other scene where we're talking about Tali and Tali's ultimate fate in Mass Effect 3, right? We're on Rannoch, rather. It's right after Shepard has either chosen to not stop the Quarians from attacking, and Legion has then been allowed to upgrade the code. So then the Quarians attack, and Legion and all of the Geth are upgraded. So the Quarians all die. And this is, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful and horrible scenes, all wrapped up into one. But it's so amazingly done. And so I wanted to bring up this scene, and we have a clip here that we can bring it up. And just a trigger warning for anyone who's watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening in your car, that this is a pretty sad and poignant scene to watch. So it's not easy to watch, but we have the clip here, and let's watch it for a second.
Beg you, do not do this, please.
We regret the deaths of the creators, but we see no alternative. 40%.
Sorry. No.
Error. Copying code is insufficient. Direct personality dissemination required. Shepard Commander, I must go to them. It's the only way. Thank you.
What the hell was that?
Wow. So, if you're listening along and you weren't watching, what happened there at the end was Tally removed her mask, which actually happens no matter what you do and how you resolve this conflict, correct?
I'm not sure if there's a happy Tally removes her mask. It could be.
I think there might be if you resolve it with peace. I think she removes her mask to take a deep breath of Rannoch.
I definitely know I wanted to put that in there. Again, this is when I talk about this is the Mass Effect 3 version of the Thane or the Garrus scene that I worked on for 14 months. This was the other 14 months, and specifically it was this scene. So I have 10 versions of this scene in my head. But what I can say is, yeah. I was like, okay, we've got Tally. She's on Rannoch. Let's remove the mask. And that was not something that was in the scene. It was like, well, let's do it. And they're like, oh, but we don't have a face underneath that mask yet. And so I'm like, then we don't show it. Isn't it such a more like a worse twisting of the knife if she takes off her mask, but you don't get to see?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so that's all the terror should be in Shepard. And if you are properly like imagining yourself in his shoes, then what you know about Tally is Tally cannot take her mask off or she'll die. And this is also a pretty bad time to do it. And this should fill you with dread and anxiety. And everything about this scene and a lot of the stuff that I was especially adamant about adding was meant to put like Tally into that position of dread and terror such that Shepard would understand that Shepard doesn't have any chance of turning it around.
God, this scene is so hard to watch. You know, I mean, and I mean that in a good way. It's like, it's so well done that, you know, first, you know, you have Tally pleading with Shepard, please don't do this. Like, don't let Legion get upgraded.
Yes.
Then Tally struggling to get her people in line, right? And then the Quarians attack. She's watching basically as these Warhawks take over her entire species' fate. And they attack, and it leads them to their certain doom. And then we watch that play out in space. By the way, incredible score there. The I'm Sorry track, just amazing. Yeah. And I'm sad that I have to do something so terrible to experience it. But then we see that and we watch these Quarians die in space, and then it goes back down to the planet side, and we realize that Tally is seeing this all from her point of view. And she's watching her entire species get decimated in space with the remnants raining down into the home world that she dreamed of.
Not just her entire species. I made sure that she could see the ships falling through the sky. That was not in the scene. I added that. And I made sure that one of those ships calling out is Tally's, the Raya.
Oh, wow.
So it's specifically Tally's ship that is going down in that shot that she is seeing, that she grew up on. And like, there were days when I went to Patrick and I'm like, here's what I'm thinking. And he would have a devious smile. And that's how I knew, like, okay, we're going to make some people cry. And that was really the fun. Like that was this. So again, this level was at E3. We did this off really early up to the point where the Normandy comes in, bombs the hole, and then a big monster Reaper comes. And that as well was a whole saga of like going into meeting rooms and people being like, we want you to be on the back of this truck while you're being chased by a giant Reaper. And I'm like, that sounds like Jurassic Park. And they're like, yes.
That's because it is.
Years later, I worked on Gears of War 5 and they were like, hey, we want you on the back of this truck being chased by this thing. And I'm like, that sounds like Jurassic Park. And I'm like, it is. And that just keeps happening. Keep an eye out for it. You're going to see it happen over and over again. And like that whole truck chase to get to this scene was a gauntlet in and of itself to create that went months. But it was always this scene that was the insane puzzle. And you're probably aware of like there is a version of this where you can have peace, but you have to make like choices 2 games back, and there's this like under the hood scoring system, and that's just like all of the effort we put into one choice in the scene. But like you called it out, there is specifically a ticking clock where Legion is uploading at a pace. So it is like 30%, 40%, 50%. You better think about this, player. Start thinking about this. You're gonna have to make a choice, and then that choice comes a little more suddenly than people think.
And the panic that some players can feel when they have certain choices grayed out. They're like, "What do you mean? What do you mean I can't do that?" You know, like,
yeah,
I can't negotiate peace. I can't like intimidate the Quarians to back down. Oh fuck.
Yeah, right. Like it's like, oh, I guess I've done a bad role play. But it's like, okay, to kind of get into the fly in the ointment on this scene, man, Legion was so fun. That character, his facial rig with the way that his like iris opens and closes and all the little plates that move on his head are so cool. That was a joy to work with Legion. If somebody just gave me the model from the game right now, I would just noodle with him and, recreate every single meme you've ever done and upload it on YouTube. So, if anybody has that. But like, then they put the glowing light back on, and the glowing light wasn't there. And so if you watch that scene, Legion's like changing colors quite a bit. His like little lights inside of him are going red sometimes. They're blinking a bit. I did a very detailed like death for Legion where his final light is going out and like the iris is closing and then twitching a little bit. And then they slap that lens flare on like right at the end of production. And it's like, oh no, I can't see it. And the lens flare doesn't turn off when he dies. And so I'm watching the scene and I'm like, oh my God, oh no. But then I see the part where Tally is looking at the ships. And so if you've played this, so you've got a clip here where Tally's in one of the side skins. There's a normal skin where Tally's just in her default, where it doesn't have quite so much stuff on the face mask.
Yeah, there's no armored faceplate.
Yeah. The face mask is fully reflective. So to get that reflection that I was very specific about making sure we had, so that you can see Tally's ship crashing in the reflection on her face mask.
Oh wow!
And there is a tiny camera on her face mask pointing outward, filming the stuff in front of her.
That's funny and poetic and tragic and all these things.
But it's. I mean, I went like way extra on that, and it's seeing it now, I'm really glad. Like it's all the falling ships. Like those were choices, and they were cheap choices too, because it's not difficult to make a bunch of falling ships. That was like a half day of like some VFX guy being like, "Hey, can I help you out? All right, cool, give me this," and we got it. But it like saved so much animation. Like I could have spent that time having Shepard look sad. I could have spent all that time elsewhere, but it's like figuring out the weird puzzle that's like, what's the best thing to sell the emotion I need? That's like, again, like I said, it's Tally's ship crashing.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it the other day. This is, for us to really drive the point home, this is as if Tally is as a human astronaut watching Earth as Earth's leaders go to nuclear war. And there's not a damn thing she can do.
Yeah. Oh, and for the first time in her life, she is on her home planet.
Yes.
Like for a race that is a big thing. Like there's a lot to relate to with, I mean, God, this is all pre-pandemic. Right?
And so all of this work went into just one of the outcomes of that scene. And there's multiple outcomes.
Yeah, like there was the scene where like all the Geth win and Tally's not there, and I think like if you upgrade the Geth, again, bringing back old Geth that didn't show up in the game, this is the only place a Geth Prime shows up, the big guys. So I made sure to stick one of them in. I even thought about sticking one of the like Brontosaurus Geth in there, but I couldn't quite swing that. Yeah. And it's like there's that version. There's a version where Admiral Tally's just straight up dead, and Admiral Ran is there, and she kills Legion. There's a version where Legion is a hologram man, which was weird. That was hard.
Yeah, that was good. The hologram Legion, and I think I remember getting that one time, and it's because I never woke up Legion in Mass Effect 2. I think that's what I did. In fact, it's kind of a funny side note. I did that because I played a role play of Mass Effect 1 through 3 where I was neutral Shepard. I always had to choose the most neutral option there was, and I never took any interrupts.
That's very...
Oh, it was hilarious, and it was probably the most believable Shepard I've ever made. But because of that, to be the most neutral in that playthrough, the gimmick was that I would never go out of my way to do something that wasn't required, because that opened up more of the possibility of becoming not neutral to something. So I named him Jerry. Anyway, it was great. Didn't wake up Legion. That's how I know about that. But, I also wanted to talk about the final scenes of Mass Effect 3. I'm sorry. Before this, I just remembered that you had told me something before we were recording here, that there's something special about the Geth Dreadnought mission and where we get to spacewalk in the tube, right? And so I have this clip here. Let's bring this up, and I'm just going to play like a quick little bit of it, and feel free to talk over it while you can, because there's no dialogue here, right? So I'm just going to bring this up, and we'll bring down the volume. And so, here we have Shepard walking in this rotating tube, it looks like, toward the Geth Dreadnought.
You hit the proper word. It is a rotating tube. So this is another great example that helps my story of like, all of these are amazing, just wild stabs in the dark that people took. This tube it defies all physics. The idea that you can walk around the walls of this tube is insane. Having gravity that like fits around like on walls. Sometimes you'll see a game that does that, but like they've built the whole game to work that way. You can't just randomly say, "Oh, I'm going to do this," without like rebuilding the whole movements of the game. So how did we get Shepard walking on wall? And that's the fun part. So this is the work of level designer Jos Hendricks, a good friend of mine, and this is maybe my favorite thing that they ever did, where this is not a rotating tube, or at least Shepard is not walking up the sides of this ever. In this entire scene, Shepard is always on flat ground. And the tube itself, and everything in the tube, and all of the space around the tube is rolling. And so as Shepard walks to the left, all of the world rolls around him. So that it looks like he's walking up the walls, but he's just walking on a flat plane.
Wow.
Yes. And when he walks all the way to one side, he just seamlessly teleports to the other side so that you can keep walking forever, just like Pac-Man. And it is the wildest crap.
So if you boundary break and you go out of this tube, what does it look like?
If you were not in Shepard's point of view, you would see a giant tube with space attached to it, rolling back and forth between a space of like 300 meters.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that's incredible.
And basically, as you walked all the way around the tube, when you got back to your starting point, you would just teleport all the way to one side of that, and it would look the same because you teleported, but so did space, and so did everything.
And so did the skybox around the tube, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And it's wild. And this is not even the first time we did this. There's an N7 mission in Mass Effect 2, where again, I mentioned McVinney. They did a scene where the N7 missions were the really small missions on the Uncharted worlds, and they'd be like 10 to 15 minutes long, and some of them would have like a cutscene. There's one of those where you're on a big ship that's dangling on the side of a mountain, and at the end of that mission, the whole ship falls off the mountain. But we couldn't do that. Because you can't move the area of the map where the player runs around in, because that's where all the navigation stuff is. That's where every piece of the game is, and you can't. It's just unreasonable in 2008 to make that move. So instead, McVinney like made all the mountains in the sky and everything fall away. So Shepard jumps onto a shuttle that's not moving, and then everything in the world like falls and rolls away from them, and that's how they did that cinematic. And it was like, it was a real aha moment where we were like, oh, so there's just no rule.
That's totally mind-bending stuff. Like, we were talking about smoke and mirrors earlier. That's like a total fun house.
Yeah, that's one where if you were in Boundary Break and you saw that shot and you jumped out of the camera, you would see Shepard staying still and the whole world moving away from him. And it's all of that, right? I've got an example we talked about the Elusive Man hologram scenes, right? And so some people have talked about how the way those holograms work is that there is a box in the world, which is a black box with Shepard standing in the middle of it with some lights on him. And there's a camera in that box filming Shepard. And then that gets replayed on the hologram, basically 1-to-1 in real time. But that hologram is a limited resolution. We were on an Xbox and didn't have a ton of power to make that high res. So it's about 128 pixels per Shepard. So you can imagine when we zoom in on his face, Shepard's face is 5 pixels tall. You can't use it. It doesn't work. And so we did some things to kind of like fudge that and hide how low res it is. That's why we have all those scan lines. It's kind of a Star Wars thing, but it also, like, if you add scan lines, you can like double the resolution basically because it breaks up what the eye sees. Kind of in the way that old TVs work, right? Like you see a CRT and it's kind of better than digital TV. We were literally using old school crap like that. But so yeah, if I zoom in on this finite resolution hologram of Shepard, he's like so pixelated it's useless.
That's amazing. I never knew that. That's amazing.
But so I had 128 pixels of resolution on that hologram. So I said, well, the problem is Shepard just needs to take up more of the hologram. So how do I do that? So in any close-up of Shepard talking to the Elusive Man as a hologram, if it's close on Shepard's face, Shepard is 10 times larger than he should be. He's just a giant somewhere so that he fills up more of that camera on that hologram. And instead of actually getting close to that hologram, I've just because again, it's Elusive Man's office. It's all black background. So if I just so you can't see where his feet would connect. You don't know that it's a giant head.
Oh, and that's funny.
Yeah.
He's like, what's his name from Superman? Yeah, that's amazing.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Now I want to skip ahead to the end of Mass Effect 3 because there's, series of scenes where I know that you said that you didn't work on Mass Effect 3, but maybe you can shed some light and pun fully intended here because there's this one scene where we finally get to confront the Elusive Man and Anderson is there. And the blocking, the lighting, the design of this whole scene has just stuck with me through the years. And so why don't we go ahead and bring this scene up, and I'll stop it at different intervals so that we can talk about it. But I definitely want to address this scene because cinematically, it's like, one of the climaxes of the game. So here it is.
Anderson!
I underestimated you, Shepard.
What happened?
I warned you. Control is the means to survival. Control of the Reapers, and of you, if necessary.
They're controlling you.
I don't think so, Admiral.
Controlling me is a lot different than controlling a Reaper.
Have a little faith. When humanity discovered the mass relays, when we learned there was more to the galaxy than we imagined, there were some who thought the relays should be destroyed. They were scared of what we'd find, terrified of what we might let in. But look at what humanity has achieved. Since that discovery, we've advanced more than the past 10,000 years combined. And the Reapers will do the same for us again, 1,000-fold. But only if we can harness their ability to control.
Bullshit. We destroy them, or they destroy us.
And waste this opportunity? Never.
Wow, that scene has such like weight and such drama to it. From a cinematic designer's point of view, what stands out to you about just the first couple minutes of that scene?
So first off, this is again, when I say that like our quality is a result of how much time we can spend on this scene. These are all the same generic animations that we use everywhere, right? Like there's not a ton of like there's only one or two special animations in this scene, which are Shepard specifically being very wounded and raising the gun, which is something we didn't have coverage of. But then I'm seeing, I want to say this was Ken, but it could have been somebody else on this scene. But I'm seeing a lot of like very effective usage of the library that they had, and I mean, it's a very strong script that's killing it. A amazing background, but like when I say that the whole game is about the Manhattan Project and about like humanity is making this final stand, like they knew this scene, the stuff that happens after with the Star Child that got confusing, but like Shepard and Anderson and the Elusive Man on the Citadel, with like the button in front of them, which is going to blow the whole thing up and blow up all the Reapers. That was a target that was locked down early that that we followed through on. And I love this scene. I really wish we had like turned on the Elusive Man glowing eyes on like Anderson and Shepard when they get indoctrinated. Because I think the like squigglies at the side of the screen just aren't quite enough for me without having played the whole game behind it.
Oh, wait,
but
so
like, this is.
So I did want to back up there for a second. So those squigglies are definitely supposed to indicate that the power of indoctrination is affecting Shepard and Anderson.
Oh, yes. I mean, Anderson is absolutely like being forced against his will in this scene, and Shepard is really struggling. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, I wish we had done like one little connecting thing to connect characters so that they were more like the Elusive Man.
Yeah.
But that's, again, we did this is an amazing.
It's still, incredible. I can't tell you how many times I've rewatched that scene. And, it continues, that scene does. And, there's this very awesome, if you have enough Paragon and Renegade points, you can have this amazing philosophical back and forth between the Elusive Man and yourself, where it almost feels like you're speaking to like a fallen angel almost, like you're speaking to the embodiment of deceit and zealous, like a total zealot who has gone way overboard, and maybe you can help him see the light again. And again, that speaks to incredible writing, but of course the scene culminates with the indoctrination or the Reapers basically forcing you to fire on Anderson. And then you have to be able to basically save Anderson if you have enough Paragon or Renegade points. And if you don't, then Anderson can die. And there's some really special blocking and animation here at the end of this scene, so I want to go over that too. Here it is.
Commander.
Of course you can't. They own you now.
You'd undo everything I've accomplished. I won't let that happen.
Because of you, humanity is already undone.
That's not true!
They have the Citadel. They've got us fighting each other instead of fighting them.
I just need to...
You've done exactly what the Reapers wanted. You're still doing it because they control you.
They're too strong.
You're stronger. Don't let them win. Break their hold. Don't let them control you.
I tried, Shepard.
And so I'll stop it right there because I don't think we need any more tears from that scene that comes with Anderson after that. Jesus, man, that one gets me every time. But there's another version of that scene where if the Elusive Man is afterward looking out upon Earth and he tells Shepard, you know, it's beautiful. I wish you could see it the way I do, Shepard. And so, yeah, I just wanted to get your opinion on cinematic design from that ending of that climactic dialogue there at the end of the entire trilogy.
Oh, it's awesome. I love so again, remembering how hard the Mass Effect 2 ending was, I specifically avoided being on this part of the game. But like, I regret it because this is where so many awesome setups were done. Like you mentioned, that's such a great line of like, I wish you could see it the way I did. And again, when I say, oh, just light up their eyes, like you see how that would help it so much, right? Like when Shepard fires on Anderson, if you just had their eyes like glowing and then fade back off, it's like, oh, boom, you've sold it completely. And that's the cinematic design thing is like, we're never going to stop working on these scenes until somebody takes them away. Like everything can always be better. So even here, 15 years later, I'm like, oh, but the eye shaders, right? Just what's the one little thing you can add that's like the cheap thing that like sells? But this is so good.
Yeah. Have you heard of the indoctrination theory, by the way?
So first off, we'll get into indoctrination theory and the many tragedies, but I do want to say on this scene with Elusive Man giving this speech, where's the cigarette? He needs to have that cigarette like hanging out of his mouth. Like, you know, if you've ever talked to somebody who smokes a lot and they're talking and that cigarette is like stuck to their bottom lip, I want that thing flapping on the Elusive Man.
Yeah, right. And I always notice, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I've noticed in film, often when someone is seen smoking, if it's a completely full cigarette, like as if they just lit it, they're cool. Like the definition and the implication in the scene is that they are cool, they are relaxed, they are composed. But if they're smoking and it is toward the very end of the cigarette, it's almost always depicted in a way that the person who's doing that is at the end of their rope.
You're right. That would have been a really awesome way to add an extra level of metaphor to this scene. Like, oh man. Yeah, no, that would have been great. I wish you were in the writing room when we were like figuring this stuff out.
I'm available.
That would be so easy to do. Yeah. Well, if you get a time machine, I know exactly where you should go.
Right. Yeah. I have a couple of other priorities. Yeah, if I have a time machine, but yeah.
Nope. Only one thing to do is just fix the Mass Effect 3 ending.
Yeah.
Which again, I don't think it's bad. I think it's awesome. And I think that like we went above and beyond to like even correct it after the fact. But like, it's such a funny use of machine.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, to speak to this scene and like everything that's going on here, it's again, like it's clarity of what we wanted to do. This is a very specific special environment. We gave Shepard a special destroyed costume. We really beat the crap out of them, and I think a lot of that like pays off. And again, that's to say, like, you subtract any of those things, and this is a lesser scene, and none of those things are like as expensive as taking an actor to a performance capture scene in a mocap studio and like putting all the dots in their faces and doing all that stuff. That stuff can cost tens of thousands of dollars just to do it once, right? And what I'm saying is like all the things that make this scene amazing to me are 100 cheap, smart, right decisions. Because like that's the thing, we didn't have the budget. And so the lesson that we all had to learn working through this game is like, how much can you do without the things that you lean on to be amazing? And
well, I think you guys you guys made a lawnmower perform like a Lamborghini, or maybe a lawnmower is the wrong word. A Pugo, maybe. Yeah,
I'll take a Lada. That's fine.
That one was
good enough for me.
that was great. So yeah, I mean, Totally amazing job by the team there at the end of Mass Effect 3. You know, I wanted to ask too, just as kind of we wrap up this episode, were there any running jokes among your team? You know, maybe ones that we can see Easter eggs of present in the game that we may not have known about? I know that, for example, I know John had told us previously that I think it was his idea to put the Lost Keeper in the bottom of the elevator shaft in the Citadel. And
oh yeah. Now there are two answers to that question. Are there any running jokes? That's harder to say, because if you know Dragon Age, those guys up on the 6th floor, they just stuck cheese wheels everywhere. They were like, hey, we got this cheese wheel. It's going to be in every shot, anywhere you look. And there's levels in Dragon Age. In that game, you can't look up. It's an isometric game. And some levels in that game have ceilings that are just full of cheese wheels.
Incredible.
They had a cheese wheel joke that went on forever. For Mass Effect, I think we had fewer of those, but we definitely had a lot of jokes. Let's see. What are some of my highlights? I think there's a scene in Mass 3 where you're talking to Morden, and you're talking to him about like Krogan and how Krogan mate, and he's like, I'd like to imagine how Krogan mate. And then he like stops and he like looks up into the sky, and then like you see Shepard, and Shepard's like, ugh. And it's very clear that like there's 10 extra seconds where he's just like thinking about how Krogans have sex. That was a fun one. Where I think some people got mad at me for putting that in. There's a lot. There's a random scene I did where in one of the bars in Mass Effect, Shepard like takes a drink to honor fallen Alliance soldiers, and there is a 1 in 10,000 chance that he like sheds a single tear that I don't know that anybody's ever mentioned about.
Really? Wow, I've never heard of this. So
yeah, it's a 1 in 10,000 chance.
How did you make it a random occurrence?
Game dev, man. I got Kismet. I'm in Unreal 3. I got Kismet. I can script that up. I can just put in a random Boolean and just make it an extremely random number.
Wow, that's incredible.
We had a whole suite of effects that we could apply to characters, right? So like when a character glows biotics or gets bloody or whatever we're doing to their body, we would call that a crust effect, which is a great name, where it would just kind of like apply to the whole mesh. And we had a whole suite of tiers ones. And there was one scene where Shepard was like giving the Alliance salute or creed or something. I think James is in the scene too. And yeah, I'm like, I'm going to make Shepard feel very emotional in this scene, but only for some people.
Yeah. Yep. I remember the Renegade Interrupt there too. Renegade Interrupt is Shepard returns the Marine salute and says something like, who's like us? Damn, no one. Damn right. It was a great scene there.
That might be the exact that has the. But it's again, that was just a day. I like jumped on that thing. I had a half a day to work on it and I moved on. There's a lot of that on the Shadowbroker stuff. You mentioned, John, with the Lost Keeper. That whole thing with like the Shadowbroker archives was basically, as we were finishing Shadowbroker, we had all of our scenes, but we were essentially done with Mass Effect, and we hadn't rolled up on Mass Effect 3, and people hadn't gone up to Dragon Age yet, so we had all our guys. So I was like, okay, how are we going to make some post content for after you beat the Shadowbroker? What can we do? And I'm like, okay, well, we could afford to make like 20 or 30 of these pre-recorded videos. And so I kind of spearheaded that effort to like get those things stood up, and I like made the first like 15 and put them in there, and then I like got everybody else involved, and then suddenly Jono was like, I got the Keeper, he's trapped in the thing, and I did the one with like you cut to like the Krogan throne room on Tuchanka, and there's a Solarian, and somebody like kicks him into the Varen pit, and he like spins as he goes down the thing like a garbage disposal, and like blood shoots out. We had a lot of fun on those Shadowbroker videos, and at that time, we were doing a lot of weird videos too. So I will admit that I am the one who in Shadowbroker, there is a scene in some random hotel room where if you turn to a random TV, there are a couple of advertisements on the TV, and then there is very specifically the Twin Peaks Red Room, like straight up with the like jagged lines on the floor. And
isn't that right when they're talking about Asari vaginas? So I think that's right when that happens.
Oh God, no! That part was not intentional. It's just random, I believe. It's on a loop. It goes through like 3 videos, but like, the Twin Peaks re-release had happened that week. So
had it really?
Yes.
That's awesome.
That was like, right. Yeah. And so it's like, I think there's another one in the, what's the name of the Arrival DLC between Mass 2 and 3?
Yes.
Where there's a bit where like they take off in the shuttle and I put like Back to the Future flame stripes on the ground because it was the week when the Back to the Future release came out.
That's awesome.
There's a few of those that like, if you know the day when a scene happened, you can kind of be like, oh, that is 100% intentional. But honestly, the answer with the in-jokes is like, we had so much to do with like the main stuff that we didn't feel super compelled to put in jokes. There are certainly a bunch of them. Richard put in the secret Mars rover on the Mars mission.
Oh yeah,
can trigger.
I love that one.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like a space nerd, so that one was awesome. Like I have, for example, my favorite T-shirt is a NASA shirt, but instead of NASA, it says In7, and it's the NASA meatball. So yeah, and no one has gotten it yet when I've worn it in public. I like they just think it's a NASA shirt, but yeah, that was an amazing reference.
Oh yeah, and it's all of that stuff. Like I said, it's a dozen people putting like their blood, sweat, and tears into this every day with like a totally new challenge every day, and all of those challenges were severe. Like people had to deal with even the most simple thing of like making Shepard take a drink at the Citadel became trouble, right?
Yeah, I can tell.
Nobody was gonna bail us out, and we put it together as best as we could, and we felt a whole lot of anxiety that we had like missed the bar and that we had been below expectations, and that was just because we were crushed. And in that environment, we weren't thinking about like, what are the cheeky things I'm going to do on the side? We still found those because those were an amazing outlet for stress. But like, again, the beauty of Mass Effect is that we didn't have to feel like we couldn't get our story across through the story. We were an active and thriving part of it all the way through. And that's where I want to shed light on all of my amazing coworkers on that game. Again, so many of them I saw come up from nothing. So many of them taught me amazing things. And when I say come up from nothing, I mean they were always amazing, but nobody had yet told them how amazing they could be. And Mass Effect 2 and 3, they like for a million other gamers, it's like, oh, this is like, this helped me through college, or this helped me through high school, or this was really fun one time. And for me, I'm like, oh no, this helped these 5 to 10 people redefine their life. And that is something bigger, more personal than all of the rest of it and what you find on the outside. And that's kind of why I agreed to do this interview, because that's the story to tell. How against the odds we all were. And that's not to say that anybody had some magic sauce. Nobody was like, oh, I'm the savant, everything I touch is golden. You can't trust those people. It was a bunch of people who were terrified of every single decision they made, and so they made sure that they made the good one. Even if it meant doing the same level 100 times over the course of a year, right? Like, that's just what we signed up for. And that simultaneously sucks, but like when you can still talk about it 15 years later, you got to realize that was cool, right?
Well, that's, like I said, that is so special to hear that, because the entire story in Mass Effect is how important the entire team around Shepard is. So, and how well that they work together, because without them, nothing that Shepard did would have been possible. So that's awesome to hear that, you know, there were so many unique, funny, awesome, beautiful contributions from so many different people on the team. Now, I only have one more question for you, Zach, and it's the hardest one. What kind of games do you play in your free time, if any?
Oh, man, I've been staring at Animal Well in my Steam library for a while. I got to get to that. A week, right? But it's the crazy stuff. When I'm trying to see people that, again, cinematic design, I'm very interested in dynamic narrative. It's my career, right? And when I look around, I find that the Yakuza games do an amazing job of that. They have a very interesting balance where when it's just going to be a fun little side thing, they don't try too hard. They do exactly what they need to tell the joke. And then when it's going to be a joke, they make it funny, and it resonates, right? Obviously, Baldur's Gate turned a lot of heads very recently. I think there's very direct comparisons to Mass Effect, and I really look at I know people on the Baldur's Gate team that I met as Machinima people 10 years ago, and I'm like,
really?
Hey, you should try harder. And they're like, oh, where should I apply? And I'm like, have you checked out Larian? And wow. You know, those I've sent 1,000 of those little torpedoes off in every direction of the games industry. And the most pride and joy I feel is playing those games and knowing at some point in time, I was able to tell somebody that worked on this that they were worth it to themselves.
Baldur's Gate,
I
absolutely fell in love with that game. And that is, you know, there are similarities between Baldur's Gate 3 and Mass Effect. I put 250 hours into one playthrough, my first playthrough. I did everything I possibly could. That game was beautiful. And if you know people who worked on that one, you know, props to them, because that was a hell of a game.
Oh, yeah. And it was also a game that, again, the story of Baldur's Gate 3 is somebody said to again, I wasn't there. I've heard this second, but somebody said to the creative director of this, hey, if you want to do this with all of these choices, you're going to have to mocap a lot of it and do a lot of animation. And that director was like, yeah. And I really respect that because we had that same proposition on Mass Effect, and again, I think our directors were awesome. But again,
there were
given the
limitations,
time,
right?
Well, the statement at the time was, you guys got to do that. We can't mocap, right? And it's heartening to realize that the industry is allowing my peers to do their best work as best they can. And again, I come from modding, I come from Machinima, and when I look out at the people doing creative work, I'm only inspired, right? It took 10 years into being a modder for me and making Machinima for source filmmaker, right? We are 10 years on from that. And so it is a welling of pride inside of me that I was able to be a part of that community as it's growing, and that I was able to touch it, and that I can live vicariously through a million young people just cutting their teeth on art for the first time and figuring out how to express it in ways that they don't even understand. And the reason that this is important is my Mass Effect story, is that I and this other group of people were those people where we didn't know how to make, we didn't know left from right. We didn't know what screen direction was. We didn't know how to point a camera at a thing. We just had instinct and guts and heart and not enough sense to know when we were on the verge of complete collapse, and we just pushed. And the games that resonate with me are the games that do that, right? And I can take so much pride in the fact that those games are games like Baldur's Gate or Horizon or Disco Elysium, right? It's a bit of pride in the fact that I was able to be a part of the evolution of guys and this genre of storytelling as a whole.
Well, you know,
that's my piece.
15 years later, your work, and it's not embellishment to say this, 15 years later, your work is literally, touched millions of gamers at this point. So that is a testament to the staying power of your contribution on that team, your team members. And I think everyone who listens to this show is insanely appreciative that, that 15 years ago, you said you were 19, right? 19 or 20? 15 years ago, a 19-year-old decided to try his hand at game design. So thank you for joining, Zach.
Yeah, and that goes to like, hey, if you don't know if you can do a job, apply for it if you try it. You never know. And again, I will also say that goes both ways, right? The story of Mass Effect 2, in as much as it is a hokey thing to say or a crutch sometimes, life is hard. Life has been hard for these 15 years in 1,000 ways. And that's not to say I haven't been successful in what I've tried, but that's to say that we've all been through a lot. And it is one of the most important things in my life that I can look back and commiserate with other people about this thing that we all share. And it is maybe one of my biggest regrets that I cannot share it with you guys as a fan, that I have to look at this stuff and I see it and I'm like, oh, this is because of these decisions and this budget on this day.
You saw that sausage was made.
I don't know personally how amazing it is to play Mass Effect. I've only heard about it. And that's wild.
Well, it's very similar to, if you played Baldur's Gate 3. At least for me, that's how amazing it was. But now is normally when we would give some time to our guests to plug this stuff they've been working on. But I know the tech industry can be pretty hush hush with ongoing projects. So, what are you up to now? Is there anything you can tell us?
I'm watching a lot of Godzilla movies. He's been a real personal inspiration in my life this past year. I think Godzilla -1 is a very
I haven't seen that one.
And you'll find some peace in it someday.
Yeah. Did you ever see Cloverfield?
Netflix. Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I love that one.
Again, they're trying. What I'm doing is honestly some very exciting stuff that I would love to share if it were up to me very shortly. But I can say that you have not seen the last of Zachariah Scott, and in fact, it is the case that I am every day coming into work, and people are like, "Hey, how do you solve this problem?" And I just open up the book called Mass Effect 3, Mass Effect 2, and I on just like reading from the Book of Paul. Let us turn to chapter 6. How to make the Normandy. Step 1, and it's very much
in Casey Hudson's name, amen.
And what I would say is to any game developer, prospective or in the industry, this is a chaotic industry. First off, if you've never been in the industry, absolutely get involved and absolutely prepare yourself for heartbreak. That being said, pay attention to everything everybody is doing. Don't ever think that your job ends at your job. The way that good game developers are made in this industry is by people learning how other people's jobs work. Because that is how you step into a room like for Mass Effect and say, oh, I need to make this scene that does everything the writers need, but also does everything the level designers need so that they can so many of the scenes we watch today, behind the scenes, we are loading the next part of the level. And some of those scenes exist for 45 seconds because that's how long it took to load in the Xbox memory. So it's there's that stuff. We didn't even talk about blended transitions into gameplay, which was the whole thing we really fought. And there is the reason that the cinematic design department kicks ass, and we kicked ass, was because we were not the animation department. We were not the audio department. We were not the VFX department. We were the make a cinematic, and anything we had to do to get it done, we did. And that is a really rough road to run. But I guarantee if you are in this industry, that is the best thing I would suggest that you foster in yourself, is knowing how other people's jobs work, and knowing that you can support them and come and being able to come in that day and be like, oh, are you in trouble? Here I am. Throw me at it. those are the heroes.
It also makes you indispensable in a workplace. So
yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Well, you would hope.
Yeah, one would hope. Yeah, you're right. Well, Zach, thank you so much. I've taken a dearth of your time today. So thank you so much for joining us on the Lorecast, and we'll be on the lookout for whatever we see your name attached to next.
Oh, yeah. And thank you. This has been a pleasure. Thanks for letting me indulge in a bit of history and just share in celebrating.
We are more than happy to hear from you. But all right, Zach, thank you, Spectres, for listening. And until next time, Spectres, we should
Thanks for tuning into the Mass Effect Lorecast. We'd love to hear your opinion and thoughts on the lore of Mass Effect. Reach out to us on Twitter at Mass Effect Cast, or check out the Robots Radio Discord. Also, you can send us an email at masseffectlorecast@gmail.com.